Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everybody, and welcome to Pangolin, the Conservation Podcast. The show dedicated to exploring and amplifying the world's underappreciated conservation stories. The stories that inspire me, and I hope will inspire you too. I'm your host, Jack Baker, and today I am joined by the absolutely brilliant, the wonderful, the incredibly, amazingly talented communicator that is Christine Wilkinson. They are here to tell us all about the incredible world of hyenas, and I am so excited. As you may know, this series we're celebrating all things Africa, and of course it didn't feel right to talk about Africa and amazing African species and wildlife without talking about probably the continent's most underappreciated and misunderstood large carnivore. Thanks a lot, Lion King. No offense, but no, I'm joking. No shade to the Lion King. I love it a lot. I love it too much, actually. But what it did for hyenas, not correct. They are so charismatic and charming, and you need to love them, and you will do by the end of this episode. Because this episode, of course, we start with an introduction to the species, we talk about what makes them unique and what makes them special, and did you know you can smell hyenas? Do you know that you can tell when hyenas are near because you can smell them? I didn't. It's just amazing. And so we talk a little bit about that. We then talk about some of the conservation issues around hyenas. So we talk about human-wildlife conflict and some of the really interesting ways that has been worked around, or solutions that have been kind of thought of. And it's if you're into painting eyes on cows' bottoms, this is the episode for you. And then finally, of course, we cover Christine's favourite underappreciated African species, aside from the hyena, which are a fabulous trio. No more iconic trio could have been placed together, because it is, of course, the secretary bird, the vulture, and the warthog. Name a more iconic trio. I'll wait. I will wait, because all stars, all of them are stars. Now, as you can probably tell, I am very excited for this episode. So without further ado, I will let it play. I will let you enjoy it. I hope you do. I know you will. So let's get started. And welcome back to the show. Today I am joined by Christine Wilkinson, who is a member of the IUCN Hyena Specialist Group and a researcher whose work focuses on human-wildlife conflict, specifically around the, I feel like, interesting but not talked about enough wonderful animals, the hyena. So you're here to tell us all about it. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. We were chatting just before it started, and for listeners, I know Christine from her appearance on Just the Zoo of Us, so I know you are filled with fantastic, amazing information. I'm so excited to get to dig into the world of hyenas with you. It's going to be fantastic. But I guess the first thing I always like to do before we get into the hyena aspect is I always like to hand it immediately over to the guest and say, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners? Because I give you a very, 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 very brief introduction there, but I feel like you know far more about yourself than I do. So yeah, could you tell the listeners maybe a little bit about who you are and what should they know about you going into the conversation?
Sure, yeah. My name is Dr. Christine Wilkinson. I am a postdoc based at UC Berkeley, and I work a lot, as you said, on human-wildlife conflicts and how we can aim toward coexistence. Largely been working on carnivores lately, so spotted hyenas and coyotes, but also others as well, both in East Africa and in California. And I also try to approach these topics from not just an ecological or an animal behavior perspective, but also bringing in the sociocultural elements that lead to conflicts, both with wildlife and otherwise. and try to use those sorts of sociocultural elements to understand how we can move forward into a more coexistence-filled future.
Mhm. That's a really interesting, perfect introduction because I feel like and it's something that I'm so interested in. So it makes me even more excited to hear you like mention the kind of cultural aspects as well. Because like, yeah, my background, I've just started my own PhD in kind of looking at the impact of conservation work of a botanic garden and looking at kind of the like human aspects of that alongside the class what people might consider like the classic conservation-y nature-based elements. So it's really interesting. I can't wait to kind of dig into that with you. It's going to be really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. Um, I guess like to get us started then, we like have talked a little bit about who you are, and we've talked a little bit about the fact we're going to talk about hyenas. I assume most people out there will have some grasp, whether it be from The Lion King or I feel like Dynasties, the David Attenborough documentary did a whole episode about hyenas. Like people might have a grasp of like what a hyena is, but could you give a an actual expert's introduction? What is a hyena for people who are maybe a bit maybe wondering?
Sure. Yeah, I'll try not to go too crazy on this answer. Um, so there are actually 4 species of hyena. So we've mentioned the spotted hyena, but there are 3 others. So we also have the striped hyena, the
Mhm,
brown hyena, and the aardwolf.
mhm,
And you can probably imagine what the spotted, the striped, and the brown look like because they have descriptive features in their names. And the aardwolf actually looks sort of like a smaller,
mhm,
skinnier version of the striped hyena.
mhm.
And my favorite fact, I have lots of favorite facts actually, but one of my favorite facts about all of the hyenas together,
Mhm,
they're all in the family Hyenidae,
mhm,
which is in the suborder Feliformia. And that is as opposed to Caniformia. So Feliformia, fele, is
mhm,
cats, right? So that's animals that are more cat like. So that includes things like all of our cats, mongooses, and other related animals,
mhm,
as opposed to Caniformia, the cani, right? Which
mhm,
includes dogs, but also raccoons, bears, seals, that kind of thing. So, in other words, hyenas are more closely related to cats than to dogs. So that's a fun fact because they
mhm,
do sort of look a bit like a dog, bear, cat
mhm,
mixture. Many, or I think the spotted hyenas do, anyways. So yeah, the spotted hyena, which is my specialty, is the one that
mhm,
tends to get the most press. That's like what you've seen in movies a lot, you've seen in shows a lot. And there are a lot of potential reasons for that we can get into a bit today.
mhm,
Um, and where they live in the world, so brown hyenas, spotted hyenas, and aardwolves are found in Africa,
mhm,
various parts of Africa. We're actually redoing the range maps now, so you'll hopefully get those soon.
mhm,
While the striped hyena is also found eastward through the Arabian Peninsula to India as well.
mhm,
So the brown hyena is mostly in the southern part of Africa. The striped hyena is in sort of the eastern and northern parts of Africa, as well as Asia and eastward, and even into like Turkey and Nepal as well.
mhm,
And then the spotted hyena lives kind of all around most of Africa, so sub-Saharan Africa.
mhm.
And then the aardwolf is mostly in the east and in the south. So we do wonder whether those two distinct populations are different enough from each other to be different subspecies, but the jury's out on that.
That's yeah, that's a whole other like that's yeah, that's probably a life's work to try and determine that. Given the number of times like things like giraffe have changed around of like, oh, there's 7 and now there's 4 or there's like different subspecies. Yeah, I feel like that's a it's an interesting one. And I yeah, I was looking at the range maps before we kind of jumped on this call to chat because I was kind of I've been lucky enough to go to South Africa previously, and we saw hyenas when we were there, and it just was one of those ones where I was like, I couldn't quite remember which of the 4 it had been that I had seen, but it is the brown is South Africa, I think. So yeah, I had seen one, and then looking at the range maps, I had kind of all I just had never considered the fact that like it would be the same kind of like species across the whole of like the north of Africa across to kind of Nepal, India. Like I always assumed, oh, there must be a break somewhere because like with the lions, you have the Asiatic lions in the Gir forest and then African kind of species. So yeah, it's an interesting one that like I didn't realize just how like far spread that was. So it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, the stripies can really make it work. I feel like they have quite a variety in where they live.
Mhm. Yeah, and then yeah, I always feel like as well the Aardwolf as well deserves a little bit of an extra mention because it is different in that it is I can never say this. It's one of those words where I'm like, as no matter how many times I practice it, insectivorous. It eats insects. It eats like
Insectivorous.
yes, that's the one. That's the one.
Yeah, the Aardwolf is super special.
Mhm.
So the other three hyenas that I mentioned largely just eat, carcasses, or,
Mhm.
some people might not know this, but spotted hyenas are apex predators. They're not
Mhm.
just scavengers, no matter what you might have heard. Um, so they are eating, they're hunting and then they're eating carcasses as well.
Mhm.
But the aardwolf eats only insects, and largely they survive off of termites.
Mhm.
And so there have been cases where people are like, oh, are they, feeding on this carcass or whatever? But it's more likely that they are eating insects off of the carcass. That being said, there has been at least one case of them also eating geese from someone's goose farm that my colleague and his colleagues kind of logged
Mhm.
as a note. So aardwolves perhaps don't only eat insects, but
Mhm.
they've largely evolved to do so. Their skulls and their teeth have evolved to be
Mhm.
insect eating.
I love that in classic animal sense when they're like, "This is what we think they do." They're like, no, I'm gonna go and also eat a goose just to throw all of your science off. I'm gonna go and just like, yeah, eat a goose for whatever reason. Yeah, I hadn't heard that. That's really really interesting actually. That's something I'm gonna have to. I always come out of these podcasts with a list of questions that I then go away and research just for myself. So like that's yeah, really interesting. I
Yeah,
guess.
happy to send you the paper. It's really
Mhm.
fascinating.
Yeah, instead of doing my PhD work, I will just be spending the next week looking at like, yeah, whatever, like hyena information, hyena papers. That's so interesting. And I guess like a last intro I guess question for the hyenas would be like, if people obviously there may have been some hyena fans already out there who've come along to listen to the show because they've seen it's hyena themed. What would be like do you have like a fact that you like go to for like people who already know a little bit about hyenas, like a fun fact for the people who were already kind of base level fans? Like, what's something like yeah, a bit beyond the base level?
I have a couple. Can I say
Okay.
two?
Oh yes,
So if
100%.
we're if we're elevating above the base level hyena
Mhm.
facts, and I'm making a lot of assumptions here, so let me know if we need to back up.
Mhm.
One that is a publicly available fact that you can find yourself that
Mhm.
people don't often know is that spotted hyenas have been known to outperform chimpanzees on some problem solving tests. So they're quite intelligent, and it's
Mhm.
largely thought to be due to their sociality and their ability to work together because of that sociality. So that's like the publicly known fun fact.
Mhm.
And then the maybe more obscure fun fact is that, at least to me and a couple of other people that I know, spotted
Mhm.
hyenas smell good.
Okay, and I feel like I will trust you on that, given you've been far closer to any hyena than I probably ever will be. Do they have a
But that's
specific
only if
smell, or like what? Yeah.
yeah, there's a caveat there. So, like,
Mhm.
often spotted hyena will have been rolling in something bloody
Mhm.
or gross. So, like, not then.
Yep.
But for your average spotted hyena,
Mhm.
they have like this musky smell that's like
Mhm.
a little bit like incense. And in fact, I've used it on at least one occasion when I was aware of the general location of a den that was like deep in a forest. I've used my sense of smell to find exactly where the den was, which was kind of a fun activity. And I did not think that that
Mhm.
would actually work, and yet it did. So I do know at least one other person who likes their strange incense smell, but the
Mhm.
caveat being if they've been in literally anything at all, they smell
Mhm.
disgusting. So
Yeah. That's I didn't realize because like obviously like some animals like binturongs for example they have that really distinctive like popcorny smell that like when you smell a binturong you're like that can only be that animal. I didn't realize that hyenas you would be able to pick out exactly where they were with the caveat of not being covered in gunk and nasty horrible things. That's so interesting. Like and how like were you able to like get really accurately like this is exact like I will be able to track them or like how like do they leave it behind them and you can follow the smell like how do you track
So
based
I
on
still haven't
smell?
like it's a really great question. And I still haven't really nailed down whether the scent is present in their paste, which is like what they use
Hmm.
for marking territories,
Hmm.
or if it's something else. Because I've never put paste that close to my face before, frankly. Someone definitely knows the answer to
Yeah.
this question. Um, But
Mhm.
like in that time, like I definitely had like a 100-meter radius in a dense forest where I knew that the den, or conjectured that the den had to be based on the
Mhm.
collar data. And so I sort of like sniffed my way to it within that radius. I don't think that like I could do that A ever again and B like on a reliable basis.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like you just sit up front in the, like, truck being like, "Yep, we'll just follow, like, we'll just see where we're" like, "Left, left, 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 right." No,
Yeah,
it's
no, no way. I mean, I'm certain that some animals can do that very easily, but no,
Mhm.
not me.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna say, like, yeah, you've the senses of, like, a Labrador, just, like, following, tracking these animals. Like, that's and yeah, that's it's an impressive skill. I feel like it says a lot about like, the listeners are probably been like, "Christine has an impressive nose." That was gonna be the takeaway probably more than anything else. Um, no, that's so amazing. I guess, like, it leads me to another question that I wanted to ask actually, which is, like, they clearly have interesting, bizarre features, but what was it that attracted you to hyenas in the first place? Like, did you always want to kind of work with, because they are clearly very quirky, interesting things. Like, did you always want to work with them, or is it something that kind of has just, oh, here's a PhD topic, or here's a we need someone to study this kind of thing? Like, how did you fall into this spot with hyenas?
It's a great question, that surprisingly does have an answer. So I have
Hmm.
always thought that hyenas were rather cute, even
Hmm.
though The Lion King, which maligned hyenas, was one
Hmm.
of my favorite movies as a kid, but I still thought that they were cute.
Yeah.
But I feel like my appreciation for hyenas has really, really evolved over time to get a lot deeper.
Yeah.
And the reason why I dove deeper into hyenas is because I had been studying human wildlife interactions for a while. So I've done
Hmm.
like work with gulls, work with squirrels, work with baboons, chimpanzees, that kind of thing,
Hmm.
and lions and what have you. And I was thinking about what species made the most sense for getting like a really holistic understanding of human carnivore conflict and
Hmm.
how what we think are adaptable carnivores are navigating very human dominated landscapes,
Hmm.
whether they're actually able to thrive there, and how people interact with them. And what was out there in the literature was very much focused on big cats. So,
Hmm.
the cute kitties like the lions and the leopards,
Hmm.
and how they're interacting with people and how they're killing livestock. But in the anecdotal evidence, you were seeing a lot of people saying like hyenas are actually the biggest problem for us,
Hmm.
at least according to what we're perceiving. And there wasn't as much being done actually with the hyenas and their ecology and their behavior in relation to people, despite them theoretically being really heavily implicated in conflict. And also, we know that they are also being persecuted in a lot of their range through
Hmm.
poisoning and other means. So clearly, they're very, um, I guess, sore subject for a lot of people who live alongside them.
Hmm.
But there wasn't much done with them. So that's why I decided to focus in on spotted hyenas, in particular, both to
Hmm.
try and help people whose livelihoods might be affected, but also to try and understand like what exactly these animals that aren't studied enough are doing around people.
Hmm.
Um, and that's not to say there aren't a lot of studies on hyenas. There are, but a lot of the work on them has been done on their behavior, their behavioral ecology, their physiology,
Hmm.
their all of their kind of really cool anatomy, that kind of thing, and not
Hmm.
so much in how they're interacting with people. So when I dove into that, like I started to really fall in love with hyenas, learned all these amazing
Hmm.
things about them, realized just how much I relate to them actually in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
And it's been a really inspiring species to work with.
Yeah, that's I can imagine it must be like it must be especially when, as you say, there's the focus is on other big carnivores a lot of the time. Like to be one of the people who are like at the forefront of being like, why has this question not been asked before? Why has this relationship not been studied before? It must be like really exciting, I guess, because you're not entirely sure what the answer or what the findings are gonna be. There's not like it must be a thrill like every day to be like, what are they going to do? what unique problem are they going to throw our way now? Like,
It is. It's really interesting, and, like, where I work is also, like, really rapidly developing, so things are
mhm,
changing all the time, and different types of barriers are going up, and different
mhm,
types of livelihoods are being introduced to the landscape, and there's all different sorts of people there with different opinions, so
mhm.
it's a very wild ride, I would say.
Hmm. Hmm. I guess, yeah. I guess it also kind of prompts the question, and like this perception of hyenas has all of kind of like being scavengers. And so I feel like when you're mentioning like the human wildlife conflict and the kind of different ways they're interacting with people, I guess a lot of people, when you first mention that, must be like, oh no, like they're scavengers. This is like what we know. Like this is just one of those like facts that everyone accepts as a thing, even though they don't isn't it isn't a fact. They don't like I do, like is that something you encounter a lot? Like people coming up and being like, oh no, they are they not scavengers? Like is that something you deal with? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that is a really common
Hmm.
misperception,
Hmm.
that's pretty pervasive. I mean, that's not to say that they aren't scavengers
Yeah.
because they are, but they are apex predators, right? They are, competitors with lions, when they share ranges with lions. I'm talking specifically about spotted hyenas because the other 2 are primarily scavengers, even though they do hunt. The brown and the striped are primarily scavengers, but the spotteds are apex predators, and they also have a really, really diverse diet, so they can subsist off of scavenging. But something people might not know is that of the studies that have looked at this, lions are actually more likely to steal a hyena's kill than the other way around. And you might have seen, the flip when you look in the popular media. People assume that hyenas are these thieves, and that sort of gets at that whole misperception and vilification of them. But the reason that they are, I think, have gotten this reputation is because they're quite versatile with what they can eat. So, in fact, someone who has studied hyenas for a really long time in Kenya, her name is Kay Holekamp, amazing project in the Masai Mara, once saw what she thought was spotted hyenas looked like they were grazing on grass. When she looked closer, they were actually eating caterpillars off the tips of the grass. So they can eat insects, they can eat carcasses, they can, hunt. But they have been known to hunt at minimum 60% of their own prey. And the other thing that I think has really pushed that narrative around scavenging is that spotted hyenas are one of the bone crushing hyenas. So they have these really strong jaws and strong digestive systems that allow them to actually digest bone. And in fact, when you go out into the savannah and you're looking for spotted hyena scat, it's often pure white because of the calcium in the bones. And so they are really efficient at getting rid of carcasses out of the landscape.
Hmm. That's yeah, that's really interesting, and now is making me think like we need to start a like justice for the hyenas in terms of like we had the Lion King, which made everyone love lions. I feel like these are the creatures we really should have focused on because that is bizarre but interesting. But like, yeah, they're painted in that as such like scavengers, weak, little kind of like horrible things. With it, obviously, none of this reflects my opinion of Whoopi because she made me love those animals so much, and like, like,
First name basis, huh?
clearly, obviously, like, we're she's a regular contributor to the show. She's not. I wish she was. But no, like, I loved her, and like, I feel like now we need a movie where she leads as the hyenas, being like, actually, here we go. This is the true story.
I agree.
Yeah, like that's so interesting, especially with like the caterpillars and everything. Like that's yeah, it's there's a lot there that I think yeah people don't know. So that's fascinating. I guess then in terms of because they are so versatile, that will work in their favor a lot of the time. But it also probably means when it comes to like human wildlife conflict, there are a number of ways they probably there are issues and tension points between people and the hyenas, I imagine, because they like could you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what is the like what's the issue there in terms of like the actual conflict?
Yeah. So I hopefully I don't get too into the weeds with conflict because I could talk about it all day. But
Hmm.
so some of the things that spotted hyenas are most known for as far as conflict in a lot of parts of Africa are basically attacking and killing people's livestock.
Hmm.
So things like sheep, goats, cattle, that kind of thing. And they're quite clever at how they get into things. So
Hmm.
if you don't have a really good livestock enclosure or that kind of like, some sort of herder that's there protecting the livestock, then hyenas can relatively easily access them, especially since they can hunt in groups as well as solo. Um, but that being said, conflict is not just about like what's happening on the ground with hyenas, killing someone's cow, which is a really serious and can be really devastating issue for people's
Hmm.
livelihoods, of course. but it's also about people's fears and risk perceptions about hyenas. So
Mm,
that can be based in like experiences, culture, I mean, even media, like we've been talking about, and more.
mm,
Um, and so, like, for example, there's some cool studies looking at um, how if an incident happened with a carnivore, like in the community 10 years ago, the
mhm,
community maintains kind of that fear of what could happen in the future,
mm,
even if like something hasn't really happened recently. Like they're going to
mhm,
be, their perceptions are going to influence how conservation plays out on the ground, whether hyenas are poisoned. Like that's a thing that does happen quite frequently in
mhm,
different parts of the world. And like whether they support conservation and habitat,
mhm,
keeping the habitat around, that kind of thing. Because it can be really scary, especially when you're dealing with precarity and you may only have a few animals that you're relying on for subsistence, like
mhm,
livestock animals, to be worried about a carnivore coming in and taking your only cow or something like that. Like it's very legitimate
mhm,
to have those perceptions and have them influence your actions. So for me, the way that I look at human hyena conflict, it's looking at all of those different elements and not just what's happening on the ground, because they can all like equally influence what happens in the end with the interaction.
mhm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I guess like so do you like I take a lot of your research is I feel like a lot of people picture like and there are pictures of you I've seen kind of doing the kind of GPS collars and all sorts of that aspect of conservation, the kind of like practical tracking of animals. I guess a lot of your research then is spent talking to people and trying to understand like where those perceptions come from. Is that kind of the right along the right tracks?
Yeah, exactly. I was just telling someone yesterday that I don't really sleep when I'm in the field because I'm studying hyenas at night
Hmm.
and I'm talking to people during the day.
Yeah.
Frankly, I haven't quite sorted out how to fix that, but interdisciplinary work for y'all.
Hmm.
But yeah, so we've done a lot of participatory mapping with people. So having people essentially draw on maps their experiences with hyenas and other carnivores, where
Mm,
they've had livestock taken by those animals, where they would prefer for those animals to live on the landscape versus where they
mhm,
wouldn't. I'm really trying to elevate their perspectives around conservation of these animals and around their interactions with them and how they'd like to solve those interactions and make them more positive, which I
mhm,
think is like really, really critical. And I've also seen over time talking with people, it's really slow, but it does seem to make a difference. Like, I do have a lot of people who, like, want T-shirts about hyenas now. Like, before, when I first met them, like, we're sort of like, "Why are you even studying these animals?"
mhm,
And they, like, wanna know what's going on, or they text me like, "Oh, I saw hyenas over here, and, like, I've been looking out for them for you." And, it's just these, like, little incremental
mhm,
changes that happen when you just listen to people,
mhm,
and have a dialogue with them and make sure that they're heard, and maybe even um, recognize your own positionality. Like my positionality as a researcher, or sometimes like I was a student when I first started the work,
mhm,
was like not just objective and something neutral. Like I talked to the people in authority frequently, and I was
mhm,
able to connect community members with those authority figures so that they could be heard by them. And I
mhm,
need to just recognize that and allow that to be part of my role, because it can make a big difference in the overall interactions that they have with these animals.
mhm, mhm. That's really interesting because is it like a so were the like authority figures was it in is it terms of like communities or in politicians like and were they kind of not doing like what was the issue there? That sounds like a really interesting kind of like connection that you had to put together.
Yeah, so there are a few different ways that it played out,
Hmm.
but just as like an example, there was a group of women that really wanted to sell some of the goods that they were making to tourists who are visiting the national park. But there was this guy who kept getting involved as a middleman from one of the
Hmm.
lodges in the park and kind of not letting them do what they wanted to do, and or like taking some of the money, like things that were just not quite great.
Hmm.
And these people were like, how, like, if we could just make some money off of these tourists, like we would feel a lot better about living right next to these animals that pose a risk to us. And,
Hmm.
and they said, like, they really said that. Like, that sounds like a cliche thing, but people said that to me. But they were like, we don't know how to stop this guy, kind of. Like, is there anyone
Hmm.
we could talk to? So I was like, well, I don't know what to do, but the community warden, and here's her number, might know what to do. And like was able to link those folks up with the community warden, who then sort of facilitated them in being that women's group in being able to figure out a solution to their problem
Mhm.
that they were explicitly saying would help them feel better about wildlife, right?
Mhm.
And so, like, just recognizing that, like, another example would be I was studying carnivores, and that's what my grant was funding. But I was leaving a lot of open endedness in the participatory mapping sessions for like other things people were interested in around wildlife or dealing
Mhm.
with. And there were a lot of buffalo issues that people were dealing with. That we were able to sort of make sure that, like, in these particular communities, the issues with buffaloes were being addressed by the national park staff. And they were actually addressing them to some extent, but I felt
Mhm.
like there was a lot more nuance that I was able to kind of pass along from the community members that I talked to who hadn't until then felt heard about it.
Mhm. Mhm. That's really interesting, and I was gonna kinda ask as a follow-up, I guess, to, like, this whole discussion of, like, what do you see as the pathway out of human wildlife and, like, I guess, like, I kind of expected a lot of the answer to be based around the animal side of the human wildlife conflict, but do you see, like, the solution maybe to issues like this as really about connecting and having these discussions and, like, the more human aspect, or, like, is there a balance that needs to be found there somehow?
I think it's like a multifaceted
Mhm.
uh, problem that
Yep.
requires multifaceted solutions. So I think the short answer to your question is yes,
Yep.
to all of it. But so, there's a suite of non-lethal interventions
Mhm.
for preventing livestock from being killed or attacked
Mhm.
by hyenas or other animals. And, like, for example, um, the conservancy where I work has fundraised for predator-proof bomas, so predator-proof livestock enclosures
Mhm.
that are made of chain link, but they also have like an opaque mesh so that the carnivores can't see through.
Oh.
Because if
Mhm.
they can't see through, they're going to be like a little bit more hesitant about deciding to go and dig or jump in there. And
Mhm.
then they're also, anecdotally, we've seen that if this is mainly like for lions getting in, if the cattle are packed tightly enough, like, not to be cruel, but like in a like just close to each other and
Mhm.
without a lot of space inside of the enclosure, lions are less likely to jump in to the enclosure. Whereas if there's
Mhm.
some space, they'll jump in, and then the cattle will end up stampeding out of the enclosure, thus making them vulnerable, not just to the lions, but to everybody
Mhm.
else around. And so, like, there's some ways of looking at your context and deciding which non-lethal tools to use. I mean, there's a ton of tools out there that we're still testing empirically
Mhm.
around the world, actually, like things like lion lights, like flashing lights, and sound. And, for other animals, there's fladries, these flags that wolves are afraid of that you put around. And
Mhm.
even husbandry things, like making sure that, like, the calving, when they're calves, that they're somewhere that's a lot safer and more robust than maybe the adult cows need. Those
Mhm.
things, right? So there's like physical tools, there's husbandry solutions, and then there's this community engagement piece where, like, it's really important for people to feel bought in
Mhm.
to these issues, like to basically feel like they have some sort of control or power over the solutions and over the conservation itself. Because in a lot of places, we like to say that most human wildlife conflicts are actually rooted in human human conflicts. So, rooted in something that's socio political or economic,
Mhm.
that has created sort of different camps of people and how they feel about different animals or different conservation issues. And if we can connect those people and connect those different camps and give people ownership over the issue,
Mhm.
then they're more likely to support the conservation and to at least consider different elements of coexistence.
Mhm. You did such a good job there in answering what is essentially like, oh, just like, could you, like, give me the answer to all of your research questions now and going forward? That was a perfect, like, a perfect answer of, like, yeah, because I always hate in the podcast where I have to kind of ask these general questions of, like, how do you fix this or how do you do that? And, like, you somehow managed to sum up all of these things so well. Like,
I mean,
and it,
easier said than done, I guess. But
yeah.
it's like those are the dream goals, right?
Hmm.
Like, those are the things that we're getting at least some evidence that they work,
Hmm.
and then there's lots of obvious reasons that they would work. But
Hmm.
it just takes a lot of work and relationship building.
Hmm. And it's yeah, I always find the solutions bit is some of the most interesting things to like look into because it's when people are allowed to get really creative about the kind of problem solving and like working together or thinking about like how can we because I remember I was actually what was it I was watching? It was something the other day talking about the fact that there was a study of on livestock and human wildlife kind of conflict and it was specifically looking at lions and the study looked at if you painted eyes on the bum of the cow what would like would that decrease the chance that they would be hunted and they found that I think it was in they had like obviously the group with no eyes and the group with eyes in the group with eyes painted lions did not hunt the livestock and then in the group I think they said like 3 or 4 kind of cattle had been taken because they didn't have that like eyes looking backwards so it's always interesting to me yeah
Yeah,
where
that was, I think Neil Jordan's study, right?
Mhm. I can't remember.
Yeah.
It was one of those ones. It comes up on a quiz show, and I'm always kind of like, I don't know if it's how true this is, but I'm glad you've been able to give me the name because they didn't. I don't. They didn't mention the name in the show, so now I can go and look it up, and I will link the study if I can find it in the description of the episode for people to go and like look at. Because
Yeah.
yeah,
I
Mhm.
believe it's Neil Jordan. He's a colleague of mine. I think he's the only one that's painted eyes on cattle.
I can't believe this. Just goes to show how small the conservation. Well, actually, I feel like that's such a distinct project that like that the chances of like you knowing who it was were probably quite high. But like it's the just goes to show the small nature of conservation sometimes where you're like, oh yeah, of course I know
Yeah.
that person who painted eyes on the bums of cows.
I'd say,
Um,
like, the human carnivore conflict world is quite small, actually,
mhm,
for sure.
mhm. Yeah. Do you find like when you look at it, I guess obviously different case studies, different people, different places, different animals involved. Do you find like have you been able to like from working with other people in that community I guess like not steal ideas but like pinch like oh maybe that would work and like implement it in your work and see like has it come to fruition has it worked
Yeah, I would say that, there are definitely ideas that we've been sort of percolating, like,
hmm
okay, I think a great example, and this is not exactly answering your question about me personally,
hmm
but a great example of, like, I would say someone taking cues from someone else who's dealing with conflict well is sort of a silly one. So I've done most of my work on human carnivore conflict in East Africa. And
hmm
then I started working a lot with people here. And now I do some work here as well on human coyote conflict. Here being the USA. And as I was working with people, agencies, and organizations that are working on carnivore conflicts in the USA, there was this thing called range riders that
hmm
kept coming up as like this sort of new, exciting way to prevent conflict, to prevent cattle from being killed by wolves and that kind of thing. And range riding is basically someone going out on a horse or even some sort of vehicle and making sure that the cattle stay away from, say, GPS collared wolves or where we know wolves are, and just making sure that those interactions don't happen. And it took me like a little bit longer than I'd like to admit to just realize that range riding was herding, which has been around for thousands of years. And like the USA just didn't need to herd for a while because we killed all of our predators
hmm
and let the cows roam free across the range. And now that the predators are coming back or being reintroduced in some cases,
uh-huh.
we need to herd, which is like what shepherds have been doing for a very long time. So like I think that's just like a great example of like you're getting at something that us in this realm have been thinking about for a while, which is like we need to make a one-stop shop of like all of the tools that we use in different
Mhm.
contexts so that we're not reinventing the wheel everywhere.
Mhm. Yeah, this is yeah. That's that is yeah. That's yeah. That's a good. It's because it is. It's like the amount of research that's been done in all of these different areas, like going through all the papers and finding and like reading and becoming an expert in something. Like you'll have ideas of these things, but there will always be those projects that you've not encountered before, and all of these things that yeah. If there was somewhere to just go like, okay, we've got like we're dealing with lions. Is there like standard ideas that have been like used with lions and cattle? Like or if there's like wolves and cattle, like just like try and like work all these things out. That's the that's the dream, I guess. Like of yeah,
Yes,
here's the solutions guide. The like easy this has been done before. Maybe you could try it. Um
exactly.
yeah. I guess that actually like leads nicely on to looking forward. Like what type of projects would you like to work on like going forward and like is there still like problems within the kind of conflict space that you want to really like delve into, or is it something maybe completely different you'd like to work on next with the hyena? Like, what's the future looking like for your work?
I have so many things I wanna work on with hyenas, but I think,
Hmm.
like, my number one favorite thing that I'm really interested in pushing forward is
Hmm.
trying to quantify the benefits of hyenas and other apex predators and scavenging species for humans,
Hmm.
especially in locations that are dealing with things like a lot of anthrax outbreaks, etcetera. Like, we do know, or we have a conjecture that spotted hyenas and even perhaps vultures and other scavenging species can be endpoints for disease. And there's been one really nice paper that came out where the author tried to quantify just how much disease hyenas are taking out of a landscape and maybe like how much money
Hmm.
they're saving people in that process. But that was in Ethiopia,
Hmm.
and it was a very specific setting. And Ethiopia has a lot of places where people actually don't necessarily hate hyenas compared to everywhere else because they have longstanding cultural and religious affiliations with spotted hyenas, and now
Hmm.
that's morphing into like ecotourism, and so they're tolerated quite a lot more
Hmm.
in a lot of parts of Ethiopia. So my goal is to try and figure out in these landscapes where they're not tolerated, which is most landscapes where spotted hyenas are, what are their direct and indirect benefits for people? How are they interacting with other scavenging species? And how are those interactions and those benefits changing as the
Hmm.
landscapes are changing? And then, sort of along the lines of landscape change, I do a lot of work on fence ecology, which sounds like a silly thing, but it came, me and four or five other people kind of quote unquote invented the field of fence ecology like 5 years ago, 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know exactly now, um, and have been diving deeper into it because there's a field called road ecology. It's like 20 something years old now,
Hmm.
where they look at the ecological effects of roads because roads are everywhere. Fences are orders of magnitude more dense and numerous around the world than roads are. And in fact,
Hmm.
the length of fences around the world could likely reach the sun. So
Hmm.
it's really important for us to try and figure out on a broader scale, like what the ecological impacts are. And the
Hmm.
hyenas in my study site navigate quite a lot of fences, and they are really figuring out how to do it in ways
Hmm.
that make me wonder, like, why are they taking all of these risks to go through and under fences? And what are like the broader behavioral and clan level and population level effects of those fences on what we think of as a very behaviorally plastic adaptable animal. So
Hmm.
that's kind of my next thing is quantifying benefits and also seeing what the heck fences are doing for these animals.
Mhm. That's I mean, like, I can't believe that's not been, like, done before. When you think, like, because roads, obviously, they are, like, yeah, they impact all sorts of things. We've had so many episodes with people talking about the impact of kind of whether it be not in this series about Africa, but, like, in South America, certainly we talked with people about kind of anteaters and armadillos and tapirs and all of these things crossing roads, and, like, that is a huge thing. It's weird to me, especially when it's so well known than the animals that get caught on fences and get kind of stuck in fences or have to go up. Like, I just like I can't believe up until like you happen, like, you guys, like, your group of people put this together, like, that wasn't a really well studied area. That's really interesting, actually, really interesting. Like,
Yeah, and I would say like the people who are really doing it, going ham on it right now, fence ecology, are in places like Montana and Wyoming,
mhm,
where they're trying to restore migrations and the safety of migrations for animals like pronghorn.
mhm,
And so there's a lot of like fence removal initiatives, like from sort of relic fences that used to be out on the landscape for cattle, and
mhm,
then wildlife friendly fencing. But then, like where I work, we have a fully fenced national park, so what we call
mhm,
conservation fencing. It's really popular in South Africa, but also other areas of Africa. Um, and maybe without that fencing, like we would have no national park. So, like, there are ecological winners and losers for every fence. We just don't
mhm.
have a scalable idea of what that looks like.
Mhm. That's so interesting, and it's something that I feel like, yeah, I could sit here and we could bounce ideas back and chat about it all day, and I wish we could, but I feel like we're we're swiftly running out of time, and I'm like, this has been a whirlwind, and I'm like, I feel like there's so many more things I want to talk to you about, and like it's been so interesting. But before we kind of wrap up, there are some things that I wanted to kind of mention before, like, we run out of time. The first of which, I guess, is like something that you've been working on and was actually published today, and I guess kind of goes into maybe you'd want to look into it more in the future, I suppose, as well, is a paper that has come out called, and I've written it down, Public Interest in Individual Study Animals Can Bolster Wildlife Conservation. And that's and I feel like that is a whole podcast unto itself. But like, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that before we run out of time. Like, could you tell the listeners about that? Because I think it's such an interesting idea.
Yeah, for sure. So the piece was actually kind of funny because I dreamed about writing it one night and then woke up and I wrote it, um, which is very unusual.
Hmm.
Definitely not what I should have been doing that day. But the reason I dreamed about this piece is because our famous mountain lion in the Hollywood Hills, P22, had
Hmm.
just been euthanized by authorities because he was injured and sick. And the reason that they knew that was because, or like they realized that they needed to capture him and find out, was
Hmm.
because he had started eating people's pets. Like, so he eats at least like a chihuahua or two or something like that. Um, and the really interesting thing about P22 is that he was living alone in Griffith Park in Hollywood, and he didn't have any connectivity to be able to have a mate, right? So he was the only
Hmm.
mountain lion there. And he ended up, because of all of the narrative that was built around him as like the Hollywood cat,
Hmm.
he ended up being sort of like the poster puma of the Save LA Cougars campaign, which fueled what is now like a multi-million-dollar effort to build a wildlife crossing across like a giant 10-lane highway
Hmm.
down in LA that connects to major ecosystems. So uh, it's arguable that without having P22's narrative and the public sort of affinity for him, and that like all of the stories around him and connection to him, there wouldn't have been a poster puma for that
Hmm.
campaign. And maybe all of the animals that are now going to benefit from that wildlife crossing wouldn't actually have a wildlife crossing
Hmm.
coming up down the pipe. So just that power of creating public facing narratives around P22. I mean, another great example is like, if any animal, if any carnivore is going around killing pets, like the first reaction people have is like going on social media and being like, we need to kill all of these things. Like, why do we let them live next to us? But P22 started killing pets, and everyone's like, oh, poor baby. What happened to him? Like, what's wrong with him? Right. And like
Uh-huh.
the narrative is different because it was set up so that people were connected to him. And so this piece is all about what are the other ways that we should sort of be thinking about building maybe naming our study animals, even if they're
Hmm.
utilitarian like P22, and building public narratives so that we can create these broader conservation impacts. And like, I think some smaller examples would be, any naming contests that they have at the zoo, where like
Hmm.
then the money that comes from that naming contest, if it's like an auction or something, goes to conservation of that animal in the wild. There's different things you can do where there's a company where you can buy a bracelet, and that bracelet is connected to a GPS collared animal that you can then track, and like the money goes
Hmm.
to so there's lots of different ways to harness narrative for broader conservation outcomes.
No, and it's like I feel like it's so evidenced in like when you see all the documentaries and stuff, and like all the Attenborough things, and all of the kind of like the things that are streamed and created. There's always that narrative in them, so it's interesting, like that conservation in terms of like practical, real life, almost like stories, like science stories, haven't used that before, and like it's interesting. It's also interesting that you came up with this. I've heard like songwriters and things like wake up in the middle of the night and they go, "I have this lyric and I need to write it down. Like I need to do this." I didn't know people dreamed of like scientific papers. Like, yeah.
I It's definitely a first for me. I'm a little embarrassed
Hmm.
by it, but I think it's really cool that it got published.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so fascinating, and I think it's something that like maybe one day once like more people have contributed to that kind of like dialogue and like more people have thought about it and more papers are out there. That's a whole podcast, as I say, to itself because it's such an interesting idea, especially when the documentaries and zoos and all sorts of other stuff. It's so interesting. Um, but sadly, it's so interesting for another day because we're running out of time. Because in the classic sense, I asked way more questions than I planned. Um, I guess, like, before we go, there's a couple questions that I always like to ask people, and we can shoot through them nice and quickly so you can get off to do your. The face of hyenas. You're off to do a Reddit ask me. It's AMA ask me anything about hyenas.
Hmm.
So listeners, you can go back and find that when this goes live. Um, but I guess like the questions I've asked the question that I've asked everyone this series is in terms of like African species, because the whole series is focused on Africa. Aside from hyenas, because we've just spent a while talking about them, what is an underappreciated, bizarre, weird African species, whether it be plant or animal or whatever you want it to be, that you'd like to shine the spotlight on that people should go and look up and appreciate more?
Yeah. Okay. I have three, and I'll shoot through them with a sentence each. So my very favorite bird of all time is the secretary bird.
Yep.
If you haven't seen it, it's tall and white and gray. It has a little crest on its head and really long legs that it uses to stomp snakes to death and eat them. Um, awesome
Mhm,
bird. Also happens to be the only bird in the family Sagittariidae, which is a coincidence that
mhm.
I'm a Sagittarius. It is not why I like the bird, but it's a
That
nice coincidence.
I think that's the universe telling you something. It's got to be. It's got to be. Yeah.
Vultures, as I mentioned before,
Mhm,
I think that they are. I mean, I know that they are highly underappreciated. They are the
mhm,
cleanup crew for the environment, along with our hyenas and our jackals,
mhm,
and they are very likely endpoints for diseases and cleaning diseases out of the environment. Although that
mhm,
remains to be seen. And then, last but not least, keeping up with the things that people consider to be ugly in the public, warthogs. Okay, not just because of Pumbaa, but they are these ecosystem engineers where
mhm,
they dig sort of tunnels and holes in all sorts of places as they're rooting through the ground, but they're also really good at just digging in general. And so, in my study site, aside from just being like, the animal that maybe a hyena will then dig out an old warthog den and like make
mhm,
it into its own den, right? Like, so they help other animals to subsist, but they also are the ones that are like the most prolific diggers under the fence lines that then let other animals through as well
mhm.
that can't dig. So I'm that's like another kind of fence
Yep.
ecology point.
Mhm. They're your fence heroes. They can, yeah, get people to move around, all sorts of things. I guess like an excellent selection because like I've never seen a secretary bird. I love vultures and warthogs. Like I have seen in like when I say I've never seen a secretary bird, I've never seen one in real life. I know like the image, but warthogs I feel like are the one where I'm like I'm so glad someone has brought them up this series because yes, they are. They're like they're not the most beautiful creatures in the world. We can hold our hands up to that, but they are some of the most charismatic, interesting, like personality-full animals of like you'll see. Like they're so interesting, and listeners go away and appreciate all of these bizarre things. Like wonderful, excellent. And then I guess the final question I like to ask is if you had a piece of advice for somebody who is interested in hyenas or conservation, what would it be? Like, how can they get more involved?
Okay. There are lots of ways to get involved in conservation.
Hmm.
You don't have to be a scientist or anything like that. There are lots of people that constantly need your money. If you have
Hmm.
the donations to spare, a lot of the people who are doing the best work on the ground, whether they're scientists or community members, are
Hmm.
doing it like for free because it's not like a like it doesn't pay big to do the right thing,
Hmm.
unfortunately, in capitalism.
Yep.
And then I would say, like, if you have like a yard or anything like that, like try to plant native species in your yard, attract the native species, make it a refuge for your local animals, which are usually the ones that are the least appreciated because
Hmm.
everyone's used to watching quote unquote exotic species on the television that they forget that they
Hmm.
have their own native species right next to them. And
Hmm.
then, there's a bunch of other things you can do that are like more one off things like, trash cleanups and that kind of stuff that really does make a difference.
Hmm.
So I would say, if you can donate, build habitat or restore habitat in any way where you are, you're contributing to
Hmm.
conservation.
That's fantastic advice because that's like, yeah, the whole theme of this series is Africa, but I feel like it is something that every so often we need to remind ourselves that while the theme is maybe somewhere that isn't home for a lot of people, nature is everywhere, nature is all around us, and we can appreciate it no matter where it is. And I think that's such an important reminder to have. So that's fantastic and such a good way to end out the episode. I guess like where like before you go, is there anywhere people can follow you or keep up to date with your work?
Yeah, so you can check me out on Twitter at Scrap Naturalist. Couldn't fit Scrappy Naturalist. You can go to my website, scrappynaturalist.com. And yeah, I think like if you want to learn more about what we're doing with hyenas, we're actually currently
Mhm.
in the planning stage for the long-term version of our hyenas and communities project in Kenya. trying to make it Kenyan-led entirely. The communities are really excited about it continuing, and we're looking for both the structure and the financial support. But we're also looking for people who are interested in making us a logo or a website. So if that's
Mhm.
you, please feel free to reach out to me.
Mhm. That would be amazing because I that's and something that I always say is like conservation isn't just scientists in air quotes. It's people who do the website and the design and the art and all of the other bits that go along. So yeah, now is your chance to use those skill sets. People go to Twitter, go to the website, find a way to contact Christine, and I'll put all the links to all of that in the description, so it's easy to get in contact if you're one of those people who would like to help out. But no, that's everything that I had to ask you. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today and for all of your insights. And it's been just fantastic to talk to you. Thank you so much. I feel like I now have hours worth of homework to do because I'm like, I need to know more and more and more. But like, thank you so much for opening that part of my mind to things I didn't know or appreciate about by hyenas before. Thank you.
Of course, anytime.
No, thank you so much for all of your time and all of the information. It's just been so fascinating getting to know and grow my love and appreciation for something that is like an underappreciated, bizarre, wonderful animal. So thank you so, so much. Like, as I say, I'll put the links to everything down in the description for the episode so everybody can go down there. While they're down there, they can also follow us. We're at Pangolin Podcast on everything. I'm at The Only Jack Baker on Instagram and at Only Jack Baker on Twitter, so you can follow me as well. And yeah, aside from that, I guess all that remains is for me to say another huge thank you to you, Christine, for all of your time and insights, and a huge thank you to all of the listeners again. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And until next time, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.